Whenever a sequel comes out to a movie that we really, really enjoy, that's an exciting moment. That's like a little mini Christmas. We dig that shit. But here's the thing. Today I want to talk to you about sequel titles and how very, very strange they can be. Let's get started. Ba-da-ba-ba-da-ba-ba. Hey everybody, I'm Andrew Fantasia. Thanks for tuning in. As usual, if you enjoy this video, please feel free to give it a thumbs up and give some love to that subscribe button as well. What am I blabbing about today? I'm blabbing about sequel titles. And I feel like there's a lot there that I want to unpack and talk about. I've mentioned it before. So, without further ado, what's the deal with these sequel titles, people? I mean, come on! I feel like that's how you should start a conversation like this. So, sequel titles have always fascinated me. And I'm a fan of franchises. I like when movies tell a big story that goes on and on. I don't like it when sequels just exist because, the filmmakers are bored and they can't think of anything new. But I do like it when sequels continue telling a story that was started and hasn't finished yet. That's what a good sequel should do. To me, there's two kinds of sequels. There are continuations and regurgitations. You can guess which one is better. For example, continuation, regurgitation. Continuation, regurgitation. You get the idea. So my big gripe, I guess, with sequel titles, I think my biggest concern when it comes to them is I'm an old school kind of guy. I am. I'm an old-fashioned man about town, swinging my pocket watch on its gold chain, faux gold, because I can't really afford anything else. But, I'm that kind of dude. I'm just an old soul, and when it comes to movies, I feel the same way. I'm very retrospective. And in the past, movie sequel titles have been a bit more streamlined than they are right now. But they didn't always start that way. They kind of had to build towards that, and now they're degrading again. So let me tell you exactly what I mean. The first movies that really started to build a huge franchise around themselves, I'm talking like OG, shared cinematic universe franchise goodness. We're talking the Universal monster movies. You got your Frankenstein, you got your Wolfmans, you got your Draculas and creatures from African American lagoons, all that kind of stuff. But when those movies had their inevitable sequels, and they had many of those because they were very popular movies, they weren't just called, Frankenstein 2, Wolfman 2. No, that's not what happened. Instead, you got Frankenstein, and then you got The Bride of Frankenstein, and then you got Son of Frankenstein, and then, hey, why not Ghost of Frankenstein and House of Frankenstein? So they really got creative and played around with the titles, which I like, but it makes it very confusing because nowadays, if you want to know, okay, which order should I watch them in, well, you're shit out of luck. You got to do some research and maybe you'll find the right answer. I mean, the sequel to The Wolfman wasn't called Wolfman 2. It was called Frankenstein Meets the Wolfman. So that tradition sort of carried on into the 50s and such. There weren't a huge load of sequels around that era, except when it came to like B-movies and horror movies. But then as we started to see into the 70s and 80s, well, the 70s and 80s, baby, that's where they started getting a little smarter with the way they titled their sequels. Look at any franchise from the 70s or 80s. The sequels almost always, not always, but almost always, were numbered with Roman numerals. Because it's clean, it's efficient, it gets right to the point, tells you what you need to know, what order to watch everything in. Boom. Beautiful. Sometimes they have subtitles, sometimes they don't. Either way, that's okay. This tradition even carried on into the early 90s. It was a very popular and very just logical way to organize your movie titles. But then you start noticing a little bit of a trend in there, don't you? Some franchises, particularly the really big popular ones, they'll start off numbering their movies like normal people, but then they'll stop numbering them. Then all of a sudden they just have weird subtitles instead. There is a reason. I mean, if you ask anybody who works in the Hollywood industry, they will tell you that, for the 6th Halloween movie, we decided not to write the number 6 in the title because we don't want the audience to feel like they have to see all the other ones first. We want them to just go and watch it. And that is a little bit true. I mean, yeah, that is the business reason for dropping the number, sure. But I don't buy that 100%. One of the godfathers of online reviewing, a guy by the name of James Rolfe, he put it so beautifully that there's really no other way to say this but to quote him. James Rolfe was talking about the Halloween movie titles and how eventually they just stopped numbering them, I believe after 5. And really, he said, it just feels like they are embarrassed that they made so many. And you know what? I think that hit the nail right on the head. Again, sure, they'll say, ooh, but no, we want audiences to feel fresh and exciting and new. And if they see the number, it might make them feel like they have to dedicate themselves to the first ones, blah, blah. No. That's just industry bullshit, kids. That's just what the suits want you to think. I believe, in my heart of hearts, that what James Rolfe said is absolutely 100% correct. And yeah, it gets to a point where they are embarrassed that they made so many of these. They're embarrassed that they can't come up with something fresh and that they have to keep drawing back to the same well. And in the case of Halloween in particular, making the same movie 20 times, that it just embarrassed the hell out of them. And they're just like, yeah, just take out the number. That is really the best explanation I have ever heard for this odd phenomenon. But what I love so much about sequel titles is there are so many different creative ways you can do them. Naming a sequel is almost a little mini art unto itself. One of the places I like to look is the Marvel Cinematic Universe. Okay, so you've got like 10 franchises in there right now with more to come. And every franchise kind of does its own little different thing. Captain America and the Thor movies, they just have subtitles. Captain America, the Winter Soldier. Captain America, Civil War. Thor, Ragnarok. They do the subtitle thing. That's cool. Iron Man is a little bit simpler. It just has numbers. Plain and simple. Iron Man, Iron Man 2, Iron Man 3. Bada boom, bada bing. We're good. You know which ones to watch. The Spider-Man movies are doing this really cool thing where they're using the theme of home in the titles. So first you had Homecoming and now you have Far From Home. That's very rare. I haven't seen that too often, and I hope that when they make the third Spider-Man movie, the word home is still somehow in the title, or it alludes to home, because that would be a really neat little through line to have. The Avengers movies have subtitles too, and they're very epic sounding titles. Age of Ultron, Infinity War, whatever part 4 is going to be called. And they have this air of gravitas to them that sounds like an older movie, if that makes sense. Older movies, sequels, have these very bombastic, epic titles. I mean, Winter Soldier is a cool, interesting title, but it's not really big and epic. Now look at something older, like The Revenge of Michael Myers. Yeah, that sounds kind of hardcore. So the Avengers titles kind of have that old school, pulpy, hardcore, epic-sounding subtitles, and I like that a lot, and I can't wait to find out what Part 4 is going to be called. My money is on Eternity War, but hey, that's just me. It's not like I have an inside line to the Russo brothers, or do I? My favorite so far, though, is what they've been doing with Guardians of the Galaxy. And it's so simple and so beautiful and so context sensitive. Because I believe the best kind of sequel titles are context sensitive ones. Peter Quill listens to a cassette tape and then he gets a Volume 2 cassette tape. Well, Guardians of the Galaxy sequel was called Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 2. That is beautiful. When I first heard that, I was on cloud nine. I loved that idea. And that's a very old-fashioned kind of thing, too. In the olden, 80s days, you might have the rare movie that was called Volume 2 or something like that. Or Part 2. That's a lost art. The word part is almost extinct in movie titles. And that kind of makes me sad. Just a little bit. So for Guardians of the Galaxy to have that volume in there, it's A, context sensitive because the movie involves a tape that says Volume 2. And B, it's an extra layer of context sensitive because Guardians of the Galaxy is about a guy who's sort of grew up with 80s pop culture and all of a sudden, he's in space now, so all he knows is 80s pop culture. Movie sequels in the 80s would start with Part 2 or Volume 2. It all adds up perfectly. That's why that's my favorite sequel titling in the entire MCU. It's just beautiful. So in my opinion, what makes a good sequel title and what makes a bad sequel title? Well, like I said, good ones are something like what Guardians did, something like what Rocky does. Rocky sequel titles are beautiful. Rocky, Rocky 2, Rocky 3, Rocky 4, Rocky 5. And then they called the last one Rocky Balboa, but as far as I'm concerned, it's Rocky 6. You don't mess with what's perfect. Rocky 6. And now I'm so happy that they're doing the same with Creed. Creed's sequel is called Creed 2. And it's Roman numerals too, because that's how Rocky was, because it was an old school 70s movie. There's nothing wrong with a good Roman numeral, kids. Remember that. Bad sequel titles are ones that sort of get carried away with their own fourth wall fame, if that makes any sense. Like, for example, there are a lot of people in the world who don't know the actual title of this movie or the actual title of this movie. Why? Because the fame of those franchises got carried away and all of a sudden their titles changed. This movie is called First Blood, but Rambo became a phenomenon. People love him. So what happened? The next one was called Rambo First Blood Part 2, and then Rambo 3, and then Rambo. Thankfully, the one that's coming out next year is called Rambo 5 with a Roman V, Last Blood. Perfect. Same with this little guy. This movie is called Child's Play, but everybody knows Chucky. He's the famous serial killing doll with a heart of gold. So nowadays, everybody says, when's the next Chucky movie coming out? And the studios latch onto that and they just start calling them Chucky. You had Child's Play 1, 2, and 3, but then you had Bride of Chucky, Seed of Chucky, Cult of Chucky. It got so carried away with its own fame that it lost its identity. It's like these movie series are like the equivalent of like one of those rock stars you see in those VH1 Behind the Music documentaries where they're like, oh, I'm a really good rock star. I'm very genuinely talented. And then I got really famous and I got sex and drugs and rock and roll all over my face. And now I'm just carried away and my ego is, out to pasture and I've got like cocaine in my nose and shit. And then by the end of the day, all my friends are like, you've changed, man. You used to be about the music. What happened to you? That's what these movies are going through. First Blood was like this cool little gritty movie about a Vietnam War vet or something, and then all of a sudden it's like, no, now it's about Rambo. Let's call it Rambo. And it's like, you've changed, Rambo. You've changed. You used to be about First Blood. So I don't like it when that happens. Die Hard is another great example of awful sequel titling. You got Die Hard. Great. You got Die Hard 2, Die Harder. Excellent. Throw in a pun. That is beautiful. They're fun movies. Have fun with the title. Make the title fun to say out loud. Throw in a pun. I can't say Die Hard 2, Die Harder without smiling like a little schoolboy. What's the next one called? Is it called Die Hard 3, Die Hardest? I wish. It's called Die Hard with a Vengeance. Slightly less fun. Now I have to make a mental note that that's the third one, but okay. Fine. What's the fourth one called? Live Free or Die Hard. That's pretty fucking stupid. I don't know what the deal is there, but okay, fine. Live Free. What's the fifth one called? A Good Day to Die Hard. Okay, you're just making fun of us now, movie studio. You're just making fun of us. You're taking the piss. That's what's happening here. Talk about shitting the bed with your sequel titles. Thankfully, those last two are also pretty craptacular movies, so it's like the title's quality is proportional to the movie's quality, which is nice. How about Rise of the Planet of the Apes? This is one of my favorite trilogies of all time. This is just an amazing movie trilogy. But look at these titles. Rise of the Planet of the Apes. Dawn of the Planet of the Apes. War of the Planet of the Apes. Tricky to remember which is which. And to be perfectly honest, I think that Rise and Dawn should have switched titles. Because the first movie is about the dawn, the beginning, the primordial prologue that snowballs into what will eventually become the Planet of the Apes. They should have called it Dawn. The second one should have been called Rise because the apes start to rise up against human oppression. The last one being called War is fine because it was about war. And if it had been done that way, then all the titles would have been in alphabetical order. D, then R, then W. That's just my anal alphabetizing mind talking, but that makes perfect sense to me. I think that's what they should have done. The movies are still fantastic, though. How about a little low-budget independent franchise you may not have heard of called the Fast and the Furious movies? I mean, what a clusterfuck of titles we've got on our hands here. Okay, Fast and Furious. Great. What's the next one called? Too Fast, Too Furious. All right. Nice little pun. I can dig that. They use the number 2. Beautiful. What's the third one called? Fast and the Furious Tokyo Drift. You're falling under the same trap as Die Hard. You left out the number 3, but carry on. What's the fourth one called? Fast and Furious. That's dumb. Then from that point on, I guess they just started to wise up because you got Fast 5, Fast and Furious 6, Furious 7, Fate of the Furious. Again, Fate of the Furious is a silly, stupid pun, but at least they're having fun with it, and at least Fate rhymes with 8. I'll always remember that. That's a cool little thing. I'll let it slide. I like it. You're okay. There are 2 movies coming out this holiday season that are good examples of good and bad titles. A good title for a sequel is Mary Poppins Returns. First one's called Mary Poppins. Second one's called Mary Poppins Returns. That's straightforward. I'm fine with that. One that's not so great is Wreck-It Ralph. First movie's called Wreck-It Ralph. Second one was originally going to be called Wreck-It Ralph 2, Ralph Breaks the Internet. Then it was changed to Ralph Breaks the Internet, Wreck-It Ralph 2, which is slightly less interesting. Now it's just called Ralph Breaks the Internet. That could be any Ralph. Why can't it be called Wreck-It Ralph Breaks the Internet? That would have at least been a little bit neat. I am so pleased and actually a little shocked that the Toy Story movies, another one of the greatest trilogies I've ever seen in my life, are just Toy Story, Toy Story 2, and Toy Story 3, and now Toy Story 4. I was afraid they were going to give it some stupid-ass subtitle like Playtime's Over or some shit like that, because I find that Hollywood is, for some reason, really, really afraid of the number 4. Because if you think of all the movies that have reached a 4th part, usually they don't like leaving that 4 in there, do they? Some people do. Some people just put a subtitle. So the fact that Toy Story 4 is just going to be called Toy Story 4, I love that. Those are brave filmmakers, okay? These aren't like the people making Halloween. These people are not embarrassed that they made 4 Toy Stories. They're proud that they made 4 Toy Stories. And they should be proud because the first 3 Toy Stories are friggin' phenomenal. So what is my absolute favorite kind of sequel title? In my perfect world, I really enjoy when you have a Roman numeral followed by a colon and a subtitle. I don't know why, but that just feels so damn satisfying for me when I say it out loud or when I see it on a poster. I love that shit. Like Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. Or Star Wars Episode 5, The Empire Strikes Back. That's perfection. That is a sequel title. That's how you do it. That's how Andrew Fantasia likes his sequel titles. Personally, I don't know what it is. There's just something melodic about it. Like when you say it out loud. Friday the 13th Part 8, Jason Takes Manhattan. It just sounds so cool. Sounds a hell of a lot better than Live Free or Die Hard. Just a little bit better. But I've ranted and ranted enough. That's just how I feel. I like talking about sequel titles. It's something that's always been on the back of my mind as a film buff. I always dig it when I see what the title of a sequel is going to be. What about you? What do you think about sequel titles? Is this something... I'm weird. You probably don't care about this. You're probably just like, oh, there's a sequel. Cool. I just get anal and odd, and I think about Roman numerals a lot. That's just how I roll. But if you have a particular type of sequel title that you like to see or that you don't like to see, chime in the comments. Tell me how you feel. I want to know. I'm dying to know what other people think of this subject. But that's enough out of me for today. My name is Andrew Fantasia. Thank you so much for tuning in. I'll see you here next time. And until then, adios.